Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU, in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations, and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished panelists and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor.
Hello. Welcome to the Voices in Quantum series, a monthly webinar by the ITU supported by IBM, celebrating the International Year of Quantum 2025. Each episode highlights voices leading in the quantum industry across academia, industry, and public policy, showcasing their work, insights, and impact to inspire broader participation in the field. I'm your host, Sanskriti Deva. I'm an Associate Product Marketing Manager at IBM, and today we're going to be talking to legendary experts in quantum standardization, shaping global policies. And I'm so excited to announce our panelists. First, we have Barbara Goldstein, an Associate Director with Physical Measurement Laboratory at NIST. Welcome, Barbara. Then we have Sofia Celi, a Senior Cryptography and Security Researcher at Brave. And finally, last but definitely not least, we have Alexandra Paul, Global Public Policy Lead at Pasqal. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I think that your guys' title probably doesn't encapsulate all that you do in your journey, so I would love to give the floor to all of you and ask if you could tell us more about what you do or what first drew you into quantum, and I'll hand the mic to Barbara first.
Thank you so much, Sanskriti. First, let me just say what a delight and an honor it is to participate in this International Year of Quantum event. So just to give you a small feel for what I do, I am an Associate Director at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in our Physical Measurements Laboratory. This is the major operating unit of NIST. It's about 1,300 people, staff and associates. And we house much of the heart and core mission of NIST, which is to realize and disseminate precision measurements. Within that role, I manage a program we call NIST on a Chip, where we're shrinking our precision metrology instrumentation down to a form that's cheap, manufacturable, deployable, embeddable, so that folks don't need to come to us, but can have the measurements they need in situ where they need them. And just two other thoughts about what I do. I've been very involved with the whole saga of where do we make standards for quantum. And I'm sure we'll talk much more about that during the hour. And I'm working with 6 other countries to stand up a new organization that we call NMIQ, which is laying the foundation for standards so it can be science-based and industry-driven. So thank you, Sanskriti. Awesome.
Now I'll hand it off to Sofia.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. As Barbara says, it's really an honor to be here. Well, I work as a cryptography researcher at a company that is called Brave, which is mostly known for the browser. But there I don't work that much on the browser-facing part of the company, but rather on the research team. And mostly I research not so much on quantum itself, but rather on the cryptography that tries to kind of prevent the fact that quantum computers will be breaking the mathematical problems that underline the security of classical cryptography, and that is called post-quantum cryptography. So I research on post-quantum cryptography, but also on privacy-enhancing technologies and sometimes of some human-centered considerations of the technology we standardize. And because of that, I also have to actively participate at the IETF, which is the Internet Standards main body, also at the W3C, and sometimes I also collaborate a bit with ETSI, especially creating some workshops. And there I have several rules that I made, that I have on that specific standardizations body, which we can touch next I don't know, in the future. But yeah, mostly that. I focus on research, but also in the standardization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sophia. And finally, Alexandra.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon to all. So I'm Alexandra Paul. I am working as a Global Public Policy Director at Pasqal. So Pasqal is a startup that is developing quantum computers based on the neutral atom technology, and that is present over the 3 continents, in Europe, in Asia, and also in North America so far. In that role, I am actually taking over the responsibility of all our institutional engagement across the globe as part of the CEO office. And I am also actually taking over all our sustainability, EU strategic initiatives, and standardization activities. And for today's call might be interesting for the audience here that I am actually the convener of the Working Group 3 on quantum computing at the GTC 22 in Saint-Sénélec in Europe. So it's the regroupment of the 34 countries in Europe working for the development of standardization activities.
Wow. You guys are all so amazing. I don't know how you guys find time to do all of these things and then also sleep 8 hours a night. It's really impressive. So I wanted to ask all of you, since you guys are leaders in your space and in quantum policy and standardization efforts, what you think the most urgent gap was in those current efforts, whether it be something technical, political, or ethical. And yeah, whoever wants to take that first.
Well, I'm always willing to hop in. So I would just say that technical stands out to me because there is still so much that we don't know. We're still even grappling with how we'll effectively use quantum once it's actually a technology available to us, much like AI, right, has sort of taken us by storm. And I think taken a lot of taken up a lot of the air in the room, right? Because it's so present and it's so available, and we're already faced with it getting integrated in our day-to-day life. But for quantum, where the pillars really are sensing, computing, and networking, I think there are still many challenges, many components that are missing. Maybe they exist in some sort of prototype form, but we still haven't put it all together. So, and then maybe one thing I'll just point out in terms of a technical gap, there's technical gaps and then there's also market gaps related to these technical gaps. So I helped run a workshop on photonic integrated circuits for quantum. And one of the biggest takeaways from that industry workshop was that there are photonic integrated circuits, or PICs, that are going to be highly enabling, absolutely essential, but maybe the world's only going to need a couple dozen of them. You're never going to have thousands or more. And so who can make a business out of that? How are we going to hit those technology milestones when the market won't support it? So.
No, that's really interesting, especially since you bring up how technology is often exponentially innovated versus standards and public policy lag behind. I'll then throw that question off to Sophia. In your view, what's the most urgent gap in current quantum standards and policy efforts, technical, political, or ethical?
Yeah, and that I will second also, Barbara, that at the moment we actually don't know all of the different use cases that quantum computing is going to be having. At the ITF, for example, we have a specific research group, which is called the Quantum Internet Research Group, and they published last year a document trying to outline some of the use cases. And one of the findings of that specific document is the fact that once there's such a thing as a quantum internet, it's not going to be a one-on-one replacement to the classical quote-unquote internet, but it's going to be kind of like in parallel with it or enhancing with it. But something that we already know from standardization bodies is that any kind of migration of the internet to a new technology really takes a lot of time. Like the migration of TLS 1.2 to TLS 1.3 took us like 8 years to standardize the protocol, and up to today, even from 2008, not all of the internet has migrated to TLS 1.3. So it really takes a really, really long time for technology to actually be available to everywhere in the internet. So that is going to be a big challenge of how actually we prioritize which specific use cases are going to be having first this specific technology that is quantum, and then eventually how it's going to be available for everybody. The other one specific use case that currently is kind of like really happening at the standardization point is that there's a specific use case of quantum computing that we know is going to be happening, which is what I said, that is going to be breaking cryptography, not all of it, but a big chunk of it. And in this cryptography, we're already making the assumption that there is such a thing as a quantum computer that exists and is very efficient, even if today it doesn't exist. We're already thinking that it will exist. And because of that, we are currently migrating the whole internet to use this post-quantum cryptography. But again, this has been very challenging. It has meant that a lot of different parties of the internet have had to be talking to each other and coordinating, because it means reissuing all of the keys that we use for the different protocols. It means changing how a browser behaves, how the server behaves. So all of this migration has taken a long time, is ongoing. But more than anything, the challenge is not on finding the exact algorithm or the specific protocol and how it would look like, but rather on actually coordinating between the different parties and just pushing so that everybody has the technology at the same time.
No, that's awesome. I feel like there's so many different stakeholders, and then it's actually really reassuring to hear that work's already being done with post-cryptography, because I feel like whenever I tell someone that I work in quantum computing, their first question is, so how close are you guys to breaking all of RSA encryption? And I'm like, not that close, but that's so reassuring to hear. And then finally, Alexandra, in your view, what's the most urgent gap in current quantum policy or standardization efforts, whether it be technical, political, or ethical?
Thanks a lot. I think actually the three of them are quite important when you are mentioning these three aspects. But I think what is underlying all of the three at the end of the day is the major gap is really the adoption of quantum technology, and more, I should say, quantum computing in this case, in which the company I represent work on. This is really important to have this demand-driven, technology. So it is because the user will need quantum computing, and they will need that actually to develop indeed some use case on top of that. Let it be in the drug discovery, let it be for optimization, for financial rating modeling, in the financial sector, for different really application, even in life and also in very specific sector like spatial or defense, that we need to actually then build the technology. So the supplier, if I can say the provider, the technology should really be an enabler to really address some needs that we see from the user, from the demand. This should be the virtuous circle that should be put in place. And that's why I think adoption is the main challenge. And so for that, we actually need to have this use case development, the correct, I would say, hardware development and build on underneath of it to have then the different algorithm on top of that. And today, this is a major challenge to have the different computer in place, already across Europe and across the globe, to also be able to test the different performance of the different hardware platform that exists to enable the best, basically, user experience after via the use case development. And that's why for that, I really believe that actually there is also an importance of looking now also outside of the lab for some type of quantum computer that they are already ready, as we see, for instance, in the neutral atom platform technology used, to be able, to be used by the different users and to be adopted at large. And for that, we need to start thinking about quantum as also an industrial product that can go to the market, to try to develop this industrialization across the globe. And for that, we need then to think about two things: that development of quantum computers at scale, at industrial level, for the larger adoption across the globe, needs to be one with a minimum footprint on the environment, negative one. So we need to be very careful about the sustainability of the different computer that we are building today. And two, of course, we need to then think as well of how we produce these computers in a more open way. And there is where really standard is also one of the challenges that we need to address. So for instance, as I was saying, in quantum computing, we are looking very closely at these two topics at GTC 22 at least, where we look at one, how the hybridization between quantum computers and classical computers can happen. What are the different standards that we should look at that? So as the vast majority of the ecosystem can align on these standards and work in a co-petition together. That's very important. And second as well, we also look at the different benchmark model that should be developed, to see which hardware performance are necessary to drive different type of use case development in a more efficient way for, again, the best user experience. So that's why when we look at this industrialization, sustainability, and also standardization challenge, especially for the standardization one, you really go a bit cross-cut the three themes that you were mentioning, the technical aspect, but also the political one and also the ethical one, because in standardization, there is now some thinking about how to incorporate in these standards also the energy performance of the different quantum computers.
Wow. So I feel like there's a common thread with all of your answers, which is there's a lot of collaboration that needs to be done when it comes to standards. And I feel like it's the technical people working on the product, it's the policymakers, it's politicians, it's people on the ground, it's startups, it's big corporations. And so, Sophia, with your involvement in IETF, W3C, and advisory boards, you've worked a lot with multi-stakeholder governance. And so my question is, how do you see all of those stakeholders coming to the table? How can we bring them to the table? And how do they influence the development of a lot of the quantum standards and protocols that will shape the future of this industry and the world?
Yeah, so that is a very tough work that we have ahead, in that the majority of times the standardizations bodies that we have tend to be highly technical and also tend to attract only highly technical people. So it's really difficult sometimes for people even from civil society or policymakers to actually bring their ideas and considerations into the table, because maybe they don't have the same lingo or the same language that highly technical people are accustomed to. But one of the efforts that we have currently been doing in some standardizations bodies is really to try to make certain terminology or certain spaces as inclusive as possible, so we can also hear like the specific opinions from other parts of the table. And that's how to a degree has helped, because in itself also that brings kind of like new threat models. Because one of the things that has currently been happening with the network protocols is that we always assume an adversary that, for example, is looking at the network and is only going to break that specific network or interfere in some form of another that specific network by looking only at the data that is transmitted over the network. But via civil society or sometimes by policymakers, what we found out is that's not only the only threat model or the only use case that there can exist. Because, for example, in the case of our intimate partner violence, for instance, the adversary is no longer only someone looking at the network, but someone that lives with you. So that is a huge work that is coming ahead, but currently at least we're making the steps of trying to include more people on the spaces, which is really different from how the internet started, like in the 90s, where it was only like highly technical people who were the ones sitting on the table. So for the work ahead, what I will encourage is that the people who actually go to standardizations bodies and actively participate no longer only center on having their work only be for the standardizations body, but also reach out to other policy spaces or civil society spaces, or even more academic spaces, so that the end goal of the protocol is no longer only highly technical, but has the whole consideration of different stakeholders.
Awesome. Barbara and Alexandra, do you have anything to add? Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of play off that. So I think when we think about sort of inclusion in the standardization process, first of all, standardization by itself is already a highly collaborative activity by its very nature, right? It's built around consensus, and it has a very rigorous and sometimes annoyingly slow process, but that slowness is there for a reason. It's there to make sure that voices get heard. But there's a lot of sort of forces at work here and ways that we need to be very thoughtful about how we're getting the right group of people around the table to discuss their needs. And in countries like the US, where standards are very industry driven, the government is very hands off. what that means is that companies don't jump in until they see a business case. But by the time they see a business case, they may be late to that table. And so there are forces at work, sort of like standards can be used for sort of posturing, right? If you're a leader in a standards effort, that can be interpreted as a leader in the technical field, and it can help promote sort of a commercial agenda, right? And so that's all good. I always say that standards are based on self-interest. If you don't have a self-interest, you'll probably never come to the table. So it's not that we want to sort of be judgmental around this, but we want to try to put guardrails in place to make sure that we get small companies to the table, that we get all the right voices early in the process. And there are creative ways to do this, right, by having sort of proxies at the table for industry voices that may not otherwise be heard. So I guess what I'm saying is, aside from the typical way we think about inclusion and diversity around standardization, we also need to think about the diversity of even the technical experts that are coming to the table.
No, I completely agree. I feel like when I was in engineering school, standards and ethics were oftentimes an afterthought, and I think they need to be at the forefront of when we're developing those technologies. And so I want to ask you a follow-up on that, Barbara, since you mentioned NIST on chip, and I feel like that's been the forefront of measurement standardization with NIST. What does it mean to embed quantum standards directly into products and product development? And how might this change how industries engage with meteorology?
Thank you for that, because at an institute like NIST, we think of physical standards as standards. When you say the word standard, people tend to think about interface standards or interoperability standards. How do I take my plug and put it into your socket? There has to be a standard for that, right? But there are also standards around how do we measure things, or a standard could be a physical thing that actually realizes a measurement. So with at NIST, sort of our bread and butter mission is to provide world best measurements for almost anything that our stakeholders might care about: electrical measurements, force, flow, mass, electric fields, et cetera. So, and the way that happens in a traditional way is you might send something to NIST. You trust it to the hands of FedEx or whoever that's going to carry it from place to place, and you're going to hope they don't lose it or drop it. It gets to us. When we get it, we characterize the heck out of it in a very precise and rigorous way. We can absolutely guarantee what those parameters equaled once it's in our hands in our pristine labs. But then we ship it back up and we send it back off, and we've charged you a lot of money and we've kept it out of use, you know, in your own factories or environments for all the time that we've had to have it. And then we only guarantee what those parameters are while it was in our hands. And so we just, while this has actually, even though I'm painting this in the bleakest possible way, it's actually served the broader community very well. But we think we can do better. So instead of having to send us what you want to characterize, we would like to provide you, our customers, with a device that can make a measurement with the same fidelity and the same trust that you could trust that device just as much as you trust us. We'd like to send a device to you that could be operated in situ, provide that traceable chain of measurements, could be potentially embedded directly in equipment, and provide the right answer or no answer at all, and have it made by third-party vendors so that it's totally supported and part of your own supply chain. So that's kind of the new future that we're trying to help create through NIST on a chip. Thank you.
No, that's awesome. And I feel like, again, it kind of shows how important trust is within standardization. And I know, Alexandra, with your work with the working group in Europe, as well as your work with Pasqal, you work a lot with trust standards. And I feel like the regional approach in Europe to quantum standardization is slightly different. Could you speak more on that work and how you were able to bring all of these stakeholders together?
Sure. Indeed, as you were saying, so trust, fairness, inclusion are a really important topic for Pasqal. It's part of our DNA, but it's also important for the work I am leading in Europe, at GTC 22 in particular. So in GTC 22, just to give you an idea, there is 95 organizations in total. And so this is a split between industries and also RTOs, and government actually are also involved in Europe in this setting. So it's what I was saying, 34 countries in total in Europe. So what is very important when we look at standardization in that group, and it was also mentioned before, is how at the end of the day we make standard a tool to really drive open competition, fair competition in a co-petition way, if I can say it like this, in the sense that we need, on one sense, to find a balance between technical input provided in the standardization requirement and also the involvement of a balanced stakeholder that represents the industry, because at the end of the day, by essence, standards are industrial, even if they remain voluntary. And there is where we find sometimes some difficulty, especially to bring along the startup. Like Pasqal is a startup. We have this presidency, but we might be the only one that we really, for the moment, engage into that. But we always play a very important role to bring our colleagues in the startup quantum ecosystem to be part of the discussion. So when we go at GTC 22, it's Pasqal and the ecosystem, if I can say, of startup that they are represented when we are this function. And this is really important because compared indeed to other parts of the globe, also the quantum startup or the quantum, I would say, enterprises in Europe are usually smaller. And also in standardization activity, we also know that the one that shape most of the work is the one that what we say is the pen holder, the one that has the pen to develop these standards. And for startup, the resources are limited for this activity because we need to be in many other fronts at the same time. So for us, it's really embedded in our DNA, in our business strategy to work on standard, be, as it was said before, part of the standard setters in the ex ante mode, not ex post, too late on that. That's very important for us. But also, as I was saying to you, to already think about, okay, what's the final user product that we are trying to build will be used for. So we come back to the use case. But what is very important is that we try to drive at least a sense of community in standardization with standard that should be agreed upon with the larger majority in Europe, and that then we don't see so much, rather I would say a de facto standard that will go into the market in quantum computing, or in any other quantum technology. This is what we are really trying to drive. And to do that is really interesting as well to see the different model that we have put in place. So for instance, you need a number of participants, a minimum number of participants to be able to start a work item on standardization, for instance. It cannot be just a single company that come and say, I want to work on that. You need to have a minimum of consensus. Then, as you know, you have some different process of review, of approval. But that's very important that this is something that is shared among different community. And actually, it is important because it's the most difficult thing is to really get these industrial experts, is a paradox, but that are today busy in building, if I can say, the next generation of this quantum computer, adjusting them, doing their research, doing the manipulation while being sitting in the standardization committee, while is as important, because this is what I was saying. Tomorrow you need to produce, tomorrow you need to expand, tomorrow you will have to adhere to these standards, even if they remain voluntary. At the end of the day, you know, they still are something that company wants to adhere to. So that's something on this inclusiveness is very important. And by the way, indeed, government, some countries are more active than others, but are really following very closely the strategies on quantum standardization, because they see this is really a market tool that can open or close the market in the way how it's being used. And so it's very important that the market remains open and is driving competitiveness. And some countries are more active. We also see actually also the European Commission starting to also take also some more prominent action or interest into standardization. They are in quantum, they are at that stage only, I would say, observer, but we see that there is also an interest to follow much closer that field because it is a market tool. So this is very important to drive it in an ecosystem together, at least in the work at European level. It's also important in the international delegation because I am also part of the French delegation. So as I was saying to you, the government are very active going also to the international standardization negotiation to ensure that what will be developed at international level is also compatible with what we have in Europe and duplicate as less as possible the effort, because these same companies, I am saying to you, that have very limited resources needs to be able to expand not only in Europe, but globally. And therefore, we need to leverage as maximum what we do, at least in quantum computing in Europe, to develop also that as a global market standardization tool, in accordance, of course, with the US, with Asia, with other parts of the world. The second point I just wanted to briefly touch on also this inclusiveness that you mentioned and the type of expert that we have around. Of course, I could not, it is important to mention also the role of the women that we have in these groups. So far, it is really, really tiny. We have very few women working on standardization and even less in leadership position. And I think this is really a call for all the women that will listen to us today to really be part of this journey. At least, again, at European level, we are trying to make some effort as well to have much more inclusiveness also in women in standardization, to also make sure that they are part of these activities because they are as competent as any others, and they have rightly their place to be part of it. And it can be really, what I was saying, a very strategic tool for any woman working in quantum company or in the research and public sector. So this is very important, and of course welcoming a lot this initiative from ITU on AI for Good today.
Amazing. No, I totally agree. I feel like oftentimes women count themselves out because they feel like they're not qualified enough or they don't know enough. But I think what we've heard from all of these speakers today is if you're someone working on the technical side of quantum or aspiring to work on the technical side of quantum, don't count yourself out of the policy side or the standards side because it's important to keep that on the forefront. And then if you're someone from civil society who might be hearing the word quantum for this first time, don't count yourself either because we need you at the table. And I personally teach elementary schoolers quantum. So I always say if I can teach a second grader quantum computing, you can learn it too. Don't be intimidated just because it's the word quantum. So very inspiring. We have about 5 minutes left now. So I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. I know, right? Time goes by fast when you're having fun. We have a question for Barbara. How has your experience working in pre-standardization at the ITU, where there were multiple stakeholders at the table, government, academia, and industry, been? And if you could talk more about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was hoping I'd get to give a little shout out to ITU, which really has been at the forefront of quantum standardization. I was fortunate enough to be involved and lead a task group in the ITU quantum QIT for networking group, which was one of the first standards bodies that started to grapple with what kinds of standards are we going to need in quantum. So, and as Jillian, who has helped facilitate a lot of this work, reminded me, this happened during COVID. So I'd say the big challenge there was building community and building consensus in this brand new all remote environment. And it was sort of so disappointing when meeting after meeting had to get deferred to being online. Of course, now we live in this online world, but at the time it was quite a challenge. I would, and then I would say that that ITU, there's been this progression of institutes building the case for quantum standards. In my own personal trajectory, it started with ITU, then I moved to the IEC, had the Standards Evaluation Group. That actually precursor to that, there was a white paper on the need for quantum standards, and then this Standards Evaluation Group came out strongly in favor of an international body. And as Alexandra pointed out, I mean, Europe, I think, got a little bit of a leg up, or got there, got there quicker, I think, than the international world in general, with building sort of European consensus. But at this point, it has all fed in to what is the focal point now for international quantum standardization, which is a brand new joint technical committee between the IEC and ISO that's sort of like a hub for international standardization activity. And we've learned from and grown through all that. So I'm not sure I 100% answered the question, but I just think takes a village, right? It took an international village with many venues for many voices to finally get to what I think will be a very productive environment.
No, that was a perfect answer, and it actually leads directly into the next question, which is, how can we make these conversations accessible to the broader communities? I know, Sophia, you briefly mentioned that. If you want to take it, or Alexandra.
Yeah, so there's like different things that we have done at some of the network standards, but it remains like a locked part. At least on the ITF, I would encourage everybody to actually participate because it's open, so anybody can like register and also see the mailing list. But in other standardization bodies, you need to be a member of something, either a company or an institution. So in those cases, it remains a bit locked. Something that a lot of civil society has currently been doing is, for example, taking all of the documents that exist as published by the ITF and translating them to different languages other than English. Because it remains that even there's this language barrier that people sometimes don't feel that comfortable speaking in English, and all of the documents are in English, all of the terminology is in English, all of the conversations are in English. So that is like huge. It would be a huge step ahead to actually have all of the documents at least translated. The ITF and other organizations also do provide grants specifically for younger students from underrepresented countries and underrepresented communities to attend the standardization bodies, which I can send a link, which would be great to actually have people more apply so they can actually have at least an experience of how a standardization goes. And then the other thing that I would hope that there's more of is actually mentorship programs, because it's not only enough that you're able to travel and being able to sponsor a visa to travel to certain countries, but also that you have someone that is able to guide you in these, like all of these spaces that are really difficult to break into. And I know that Alexandra wanted to speak, so you.
No worries at all. Just to perhaps complement, so in Europe, indeed, you have national standardization agencies in each of the countries. So usually, even if you just go on the internet and try to write this, you should find the one from your country. And there you can just send an email and register. So this is really the first step to try to be involved in the discussion. And then you have these three layers, if we can say like this. You have national standardization committee, the mirror committee, we call them, in each country. Then you have the European committee I was mentioning before at GTC 22. So it's the same procedure. You go via your national normalization, standardization agencies. And then it allows you also to be at GTC 3. So in this case, in the international negotiation on standardization as well. So you have one channel is this way, that is free for charge for most of the smaller companies. Then you have some fees, but that remain quite affordable. And otherwise, the other way, indeed, you also have some grant opportunities more and more across Europe to actually support startups, project leaders in different standardization work items they want to develop, to be having a grant to develop this work at European level. So this is also something that is possible. And third, you also see more and more actually European projects that have some emphasis for developing some joint standardization activity actually with outside Europe. There were one recently with Japan, there is now with South Korea, to work on standardization activity first, to then develop other type of projects that are also subsidized for that. So I think that's some options. You have, of course, maybe others, but that the most easier way to go is really go via your national normalization agency first. And of course, I am also happy to make any connection if needs be.
That's really exciting to hear. And I feel like that really sums up the hope that the younger generation has. And I want to thank all of you guys because not only have you been pioneers in the standards field, but you're also making sure that everyone has a seat at the table and bringing people in and motivating them and inspiring them constantly. So it's truly been an honor to moderate this panel. I think we're at time right now, but as Alexandra mentioned, feel free to connect with any of the panelists or myself on LinkedIn. And I think this was a really fruitful way to sort of bring more transparency onto quantum standards and policy, which can sometimes be a really intimidating topic. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you to you as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'll hand the floor back to the ITU. Thank you guys again.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the eShop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.